Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are tonight's entertainment.
You are not in Kansas anymore. You are on Pandora.
No, I'm simply saying that life finds a way.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Film Jump. I am your host, Jesse.
Co-host Chris here.
I gotta say, especially after watching this movie a second time now, a little bit of context, we saw it first in IMAX, and then this time we accidentally saw it in Screen X.
Yeah, I thought it was
I have like a quick review of Screen X.
Go for it.
I gotta say, maybe it's different for a huge Hollywood mega budget like Avengers Endgame 200 plus million movie.
You want to explain to the audience what Screen X means?
Yeah. I'm sorry. So Screen X, and the reason why we didn't know it because it didn't say when I got the tickets on Fandango.
Well, and because every theater chain has their own branding of their own like large format anyway. They'll GTX, giant screen, STX. So when I see something like Screen X, I'm like, oh, that's just their big screen. That's their thing that's not IMAX, but it's like it for them.
Well, and to be fair, I didn't even see the Screen X when I booked the tickets, so I just said giant screen. So anyways, Screen X is where you have your regular screen in the middle like you normally do, but then you have projectors that shine on the side walls, your peripherals, that kind of help expand the image. You can think of it almost like ultra wide viewing experience.
Yeah, it's sort of there. It's not necessarily like it's at least for this. I don't know if it's for other movies, but the resolution and the detail was not there to sort of be like, oh, you're meant to look at all three of these screens.
Right, it's not like a 360 experience.
Yeah, it's more to give you extra visual information to fill your peripherals while you're watching the front screen, just to give that sort of wraparound experience. And it wasn't for every single sequence. Again, maybe for some films it is. I know that'd be insanely expensive, but it was for a lot of sequences, a lot of outdoor stuff, and there's good and bad things about it. I'll let you elaborate.
Yeah, so my biggest gripe, at least, and now this is a Toho production, right? This movie has reportedly about a $15 million budget, and we'll talk about that in a second. My problem with it is that the light shining from the side screens was bleeding onto the main screen. So where your main screen touched the wall right there, because it was Screen X, it goes wall to wall.
Yeah.
It actually kind of washed out the image because of the light bleed, and it kind of dulled out and washed out the side. So you're this is kind of your technical mumbo jumbo, but your black levels weren't so great, and it kind of washed the image out. And I was like, man, I don't know if I'm really a fan of that. I like a more perfect picture.
Throwing a bunch of extra light into the same size room onto the adjacent walls is definitely gonna
bounce light
definitely messes with that a little bit, especially when we had just seen it in a great IMAX a few days prior, which was like a perfect experience. And so this definitely. I will say though, it for the deficits that it did create, like it was a cool thing to kind of have the wider view of a lot of shots, the peripheral imagery. It's like, and if you're in the right row from the screen, like it is that sort of all-encompassing experience. Part of the thing that got me going from a sort of back of the theater kind of movie theater viewer to kind of sitting more towards the middle or even at a little bit closer is because I got stuck sitting 3 rows from the front for the midnight showing of the Avengers because it was so packed, and I thought I was going to hate it, but I ended up kind of loving it because it was just kind of this overwhelming visceral experience. And so I started to always sit pretty close to it for a lot of movies, and so that wraparound experience kind of gives you that without you having to sit quite as close to the screen.
It definitely adds to the immersion. But a couple other quick gripes is that, at least with this one, because they're dealing with a very small budget comparatively, is the CGI, the VFX were blurry, and maybe some of that is so you don't focus on it.
Yeah.
And then a lot of the shots where they're out in the wide, like the ocean.
Yeah.
The ocean was not lined up, and you could tell
and sometimes,
the waves are different. They're filming this at a different time.
And sometimes the cut would be just like a split second before or after for the peripheral stuff. And again, I don't know if that's speaking to the level of production this was, or if that's just more of an inherent.
If we're missing something, let us know in the comments.
Yeah, like if we were to see something like the Avenger, some hit new like Avatar or something in that format, would it be much more high resolution and focused and all that stuff, or is it just meant to be kind of like an aesthetic fill? Because that's not really, because the movie is that front screen, that's what's on your Blu-ray, that's what's on your 4K disc, that's what's in every other theater, like that's the priority. So it's like, this is ancillary stuff for a pretty niche way of watching the movie. So it's like, I could understand if that's not ever going to be anything more than it's just kind of meant to fill your peripherals and be like an aesthetic thing. Like the people that have the big screen TVs that like the glow around the TV matches the movie. Like, you know, maybe it's just meant to be a glorified version of that to kind of just fill you in the world. Like, you're not meant to be looking at these side screens and seeing all this extra information, you know.
So,
but it's tough because this is the first film I've ever seen that way. So it's like, I don't know if Toho's playing by the rules that everyone plays by, or if they're like, hey, we can do this.
There's different tiers, man.
Yeah, we can do this 40x screen, but like ours isn't going to be as in depth or amazing as maybe a big $200 million blockbuster, you know.
Yeah, and again, that's the quality of the image and the frequency that it showed up. That none of that was a detriment, I think, to the viewing experience. My only problem was that light bleed, the bounce light rather, on the side of the screen, the main screen that you're focusing on, kind of washed out the image on the far right and far left.
Yeah,
so,
and I'll say it didn't go unnoticed, but I think with stuff like that, I'm in the theater, I'm less bothered by it than someone like you.
So let's bring it back to the movie itself.
Yep.
While I'm not really going to spend a whole lot of time to get into like the character names and everything, but the movie follows a kamikaze pilot in Japan who, for his own reasons, I guess kind of was scared, and he kind of gave up. He lands on an island. I believe it was Odo.
Yeah, right. Right off the jump, that's an interesting concept for a character. A quote like failed kamikaze pilot. Like your duty was to carry a plane with a bomb and suicide bomb yourself or self delete yourself, dive bomb. I know the words and the censorship stuff, but like, you know, dive bomb yourself into a target and take it out and sacrifice yourself to do it. And it was sort of always like promoted. Again, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in Japanese culture or what's propaganda, what's this or that, but it was meant to be seen as like an honorable thing to do.
Well, that was the culture.
You're laying down, or at least certainly they were trying to push it as a cultural thing. Maybe not, but you know, but like you laying down your life to help us win is for the betterment of all of us, kind of a thing.
So our main character, he doesn't want to do this. He lands on an island and
under the pretense that his plane is experiencing technical problems.
Right, because on the island of Odo, there are the technicians there who try to fix it, and they tell him, look, there's nothing wrong with your plane.
Yeah,
but before they get too much into it, though, our titular character, Godzilla, shows up, which was a crazy surprise for me, having been spoiler-free the whole time. And he shows up in a very dinosaur-like
we get a proto-Godzilla sort of precursor Godzilla show up, and that form showing up and that early in the movie were both surprises within minutes. Both big surprises. And the clear, you know, I'll be, I guess, the lore and history guy here, but like the clear homage there is the 1991 Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah involves flashbacks and time travel back to World War II to reveal that Godzilla was a surviving prehistoric dinosaur-like creature that was on an island, and the island was impacted by the nuclear tests on the Bikini Atoll, and that mutated him into proper Godzilla. Like, this is pulling that origin story just without all of the time travel mumbo jumbo, which is actually cool because that's a nice one. That's like he was a prehistoric creature that got mutated to become Godzilla, a victim of the atomic bomb just as much as anyone else, which is interesting.
Well, and you know, this movie does not give you any indication of where he came from. It doesn't explain
what his Odo Island
are.
legends, and that's about it.
That's it, and it doesn't need it. It didn't need it.
No.
So he is one of two survivors, and the other being the technician who called them out saying, hey, we didn't find anything wrong with your airplane. You're responsible for these men's death because you didn't shoot at Godzilla we asked you to.
During the attack, they tell him to jump into his plane and man his gun and shoot at Godzilla to save the rest of them. And he goes over, but he freezes up. He doesn't do it. So then everybody else gets chomped, so it ends up with just being our main character and the tech guy. Only two survivors of the encounter. The tech guy, Tachibana was his name, blames our main character, and has like twice the much reasonings to hate this guy. He's first he's going to call him out for being a sort of abandoning your post-suicide or kamikaze pilot, and then he fails them when Godzilla attacks, and all of his his entire team, his entire pit crew gets taken out.
Yeah. And I gotta say, seeing Godzilla show up in the way he did, and first of all, the CG was great, especially for the budget.
He was fast. He was feral. He was animalistic.
Yeah, and animalistic in the way where he was literally biting these soldiers. And, I know that Toho kind of has like this deal where they don't show him eating people.
Yeah,
Like that's not
they
a
have
thing.
a thing of like Godzilla doesn't eat people. I guess,
Right, but to see him actually bite them and then throw them was a visceral,
Very-
as a Godzilla fan.
Yeah, and to see Godzilla of a scale where it kind of works, where he's not just like engulfing them in his mouth. It's like, no, he's chomping them like in the upper half and flinging them, sort of not a T-Rex sized Godzilla, but a sort of more dinosaur, like super dinosaur sized Godzilla. Like, it just made everything much more personal and more small scale. And again, vicious, awesome looking, great, unique sequence for a Godzilla movie. Hard to pull off a unique sequence in a Godzilla movie, but that was one of them.
And right out the gate, it was something for sure. So then we fast forward a little bit to he comes home. His home is devastated by
the fire bombings.
fire bombings in Tokyo that were dropped. His parents have passed away, and everybody's dealing with that. Our main character meets another, like a local girl, or a woman rather, who is taking care of a baby who is not hers.
Yeah,
she was tasked with taking care of this infant.
Yeah, so her parents were killed in the firebombs just like him. While she was fleeing, a woman who was dying had a baby and gave it to her and said, "Please just take care of my baby." So you have this essentially a young kind of homeless man, a young homeless woman, and she's taking care of this baby. So what's left of his home, his sort of damaged home that he's staying in, he takes them in.
Yeah. And throughout this little time in the movie, it's a very, very somber tone.
Dour.
And you really feel what these people are going through, I think. And very effective. The music was subtle, but it was effective.
Yeah.
Everything was great. So we kind of fast forward a little bit in time. There's a couple of time jumps here where she kind of stays, even though he may not want her to.
Yeah,
he doesn't want a part of this.
It's not like this kind gesture. She kind of just invites herself into his house, falls asleep there with the little girl, and he just doesn't have the heart to kick them out or be cruel to them. But it's sort of like, it's not like he didn't offer for them. They kind of just stayed and he didn't kick them out. So it kind of just happened. And then so he gets a job to provide for them, and his job is working on essentially a tugboat that's made of wood that's going around, and it's disarming and decommissioning all of the landmines that the Japanese and U.S. governments put all in the oceans around Japan during the war. So they have to go clip the mines from the chains, fire on the mines, detonate the mines, and move along. So that's the work he gets to provide for his family. And you see they build like a new little house adjacent.
Yeah,
to
and
the
there's a
wrecked
nice
one.
little sweet montage where things are all hunky dory.
Yeah. Which I've seen in a few Japanese movies. Like, they seem to like their like pleasant music montages things.
Yeah.
So like, it's a nice passage of time moment,
And then fast forward a little bit, because we're not going to recap like every detail of the movie here, but Godzilla comes back, and there is a fantastic. Look, I love the ending of this movie too. I actually like all of it, but it might be my favorite section of the movie. I'll do some more watches of it.
Yeah.
But there is an amazing sequence where Godzilla attacks a larger boat that has cannons and just demolishes it.
Yeah.
And then it goes after our main character and his friends on the boat that disarmed the bombs. And the CGI, the VFX all around.
It's a very Jaws-esque sequence, very much like sort of trying to take out the shark in Jaws.
And the music that they're playing in the background was like constantly like rising.
Yeah.
Not like in the same way that the Joker score does in The Dark Knight.
But it did.
But it kind of.
Yeah. See, it kind of made me think of Dunkirk a little bit. That's like the score had some Dunkirk vibes on the ocean.
Yes, it did. Yeah, and it had like almost like a ticking clock. Like
like just that slowly ramping up. I'm sure they studied that a little bit, and so they're trying to fight, because they're just a little tugboat and they have mines that they've collected. And so they're trying to drop their mines as Godzilla is chasing behind them, get the mines wedged into his dorsal plates, or at one point they get one wedged into his mouth, and then fire on the mine to blow it up. And they manage to do that. They fire on a mine that he's caught in his mouth, and you see the aftermath is that it's blown half of Godzilla's face off. You're like, what? Like, Godzilla's dead, as soon as the thought of like, so what, Godzilla's dead enters your mind, you see that he is immediately regenerating his head and face back, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is Godzilla with regenerative abilities faster than any other Godzilla's ever been displayed as having them. Yeah. And he comes back with this epic scar on his face from where he healed.
And then quickly right after that, that's when he destroys the larger boat, and just an amazing sequence all around. And I gotta say, this is probably the most terrifying Godzilla has been in a long time.
Definitely like, menacing.
Yeah, it just absolute terror.
And you feel, not that it's a terribly emotive creature, but like you feel the rage in everything he's doing. Like he's pissed about something.
Right. But that's the thing. Like they don't go into it.
They don't personify him.
And
they don't have characters like they never refer to Godzilla like what's on his mind, what's he thinking, what's he all about. Like no, it's just like he's vicious and they're trying to stop him. Exactly.
So what I really like about this movie, and there's always a message. There's always a theme of like every Godzilla movie. Sometimes it's apparent. Sometimes it's, a little less, not as heavy fisted.
Sometimes it's more general and universal. Sometimes it's a bit more specific.
This one, we kind of talked about it in our spoiler-free review, it's not so much anti-government or anti...
Yeah, it's not pro-government, that's for sure.
It's pro-citizen.
Yeah,
it's
pro-human, pro-people.
Human
Saying pro-human is a little generic, like, oh, it's a humanist movie. I don't like to say things like that, but it's like very much so. And like, I don't like to say things like, oh, this is, if you're a depressed guy, this is the Godzilla movie for you, but maybe, like,
right.
If you're a dude who's maybe not having a good time right now, I'm not saying this is therapy, but, if you're maybe, not having the best time in life, and this is an escapist movie you watch, like, this movie might put you in a better mood, might lift your spirits a little bit.
Right. So, our people, they get together, they devise up a plan, as they do in most of these, and it seems kind of weird at first, but then it ends up coming through, and our main character goes through his arc is that he wants to live, but he goes through and he has, you mentioned before, like the survivor's guilt, and he feels bad for being the one that was the coward, but he lives. But then he goes through this really awesome change where he actually still ends up wanting to live.
Yeah,
he has something to live for because of this family he's kind of developed throughout this movie.
Yeah, they play with structure and circular storytelling and character arcs very much. Because at the beginning, I think, oh, a guy who's supposed to be a kamikaze pilot who wimped out on it. It's like, well, the typical setup would be, well, he's gonna fulfill that in a more honorable way by the end of it. Like he wimps out on being the kamikaze guy at the beginning. He's gonna end being the heroic kamikaze pilot. Like that's an easy arc to see. But then it's like, he's got the survivor's guilt and all of this stuff that's weighing on him from being a failed kamikaze pilot, but it's like he didn't want to die then. Throughout the movie, he only gains more reasons to not want to die.
And specifically to kind of interject here is the girl who ends up being the mother character to the little girl who is kind of like, what, 3 now by the time it's
toddler,
when it's 1947.
Yeah.
There's a really great sequence where Godzilla wreaks havoc in Ginza.
Yeah, Ginza.
And, we think that she perishes. Godzilla uses his atomic breath and just
the shockwave looks like it completely takes her out.
Yeah, and she saves our main character in the act. And so we think she's gone. Yeah. And so now our main character is like, well, I have to live for this girl. His friends encourage him, well, why didn't you marry this girl? You are the father kind of thing. And they kind of like really shake him into it.
So only to give him more survivor's guilt, you know?
Exactly.
And it's this great thing where it's like going into the third act of the movie, it's like this is a character who's like completely torn of like he was meant to be a kamikaze pilot, he didn't want to be. He's got stuff to live for, but he's also got like the survivor's guilt is only piled on him more and more, because you also have to think in the back of the head, like, if he had shot Dinosaur Godzilla, maybe he would have killed Dinosaur Godzilla, and maybe there would be no Godzilla now to do all the stuff he's doing now. Like, it's like all this stuff's weighing on him. So by the time you get to the third act, which we'll elaborate on, you don't know if this character is wanting to die or wanting to live, and that's a great thing when the character's potentially faced with a kamikaze mission of sorts in the final act. Like, it's hard to create genuine, like, I remember the end of Top Gun Maverick, I was like, I don't know if they're gonna kill Tom Cruise's character or not. Like, like, to put yourself in that position, because that's these superhero movies, that 99.99% of times none of the superheroes or main characters are going to die at all. Zero risk.
Typically, yeah.
Just narrative. They've got toys to sell. They've got sequels to make. But a movie like this, to be able to get to the point where you're like, I do not know if this character is going to die or not, and I really, really don't want this character to die, and I'm genuinely interested in their fate. Like, that is good filmmaking.
Yeah, I agree with that. So we get to the third act. They have their plan to kill Godzilla, and it's just great. Like, look, guys, we all been through war, but it's, we have to do this. If we don't, no one else will, kind of thing. And they all get together, and it's very inspiring. It's very like, you just want to salute these guys.
Yeah, it's sort of the call to arms and the call to action from ordinary citizens, and war veterans. It's a sort of, there's a problem and people need to rise up and solve it.
And so they come up with the idea to kind of sink Godzilla for the pressure to take him, and then to kind of lift him back up, and to depressurize him at the same time. But all the while, the main character has this plan to do the kamikaze thing.
Yeah.
And he doesn't tell anybody. Like, he kind of keeps it to himself a little bit. And he does this whole kamikaze thing, but he ends up calling back to the guy from the very beginning, is the tech, the engineer, and he helps modify the plane to add bombs and to make it to where, he can do this kamikaze successfully right into Godzilla's mouth.
Yeah.
He talks about.
Yep.
So, we kind of have this multi-layered thing where you have the people you're cheering for to be able to do it, but it kind of sets up the fact that maybe we kind of already know that's not going to work out because you have him have this kamikaze plan.
Yeah, it's a great third act because it's this plan where they're going to essentially try to sink Godzilla rapidly to crush him from the rapid
the pressure
depth. The pressure from the depth. And if that doesn't work, they're going to rapidly lift him back to the surface using these inflatable balloons, essentially. And so then they're hoping that the rapid decompression will give him like a super case of the bends or whatever, and just so that like the massive pressure, then the depression will just like rip him apart and he won't be able to survive all of it. Right. And of course Godzilla does survive all of it. And the sort of fail-safe that our main character cooks up is that he's going to turn his plane that he's piloting into a kamikaze bomber and fly it right into Godzilla's mouth and blow him up from the inside, because
that's what he was meant to do this whole time.
Yeah,
his war has been going on. His war isn't over. He mentions that, like, this war isn't over for me, because he never did.
He was always labeled as failing his mission, and so and they have precedent that Godzilla's vulnerable from inside, because when they blew him up from inside his mouth with the mine earlier, it was a more damaging blow. So he thinks that if we blow up his whole head from the inside, that won't heal back.
Right. So you have this incredible sequence. The music, it's all coming like it's a crescendo of just awesome.
We talk about like well-staged climaxes and like building up to the climactic moment. And there's been like videos, essays about how the original Star Wars has one of the most well put together, climactic moments of a third act. And there's, we can talk about the third act of Signs. I think that this is going to be one of those where it's like you could do a video essay about all of the pieces coming together to like build this perfect climactic moment where you get the sort of physical and thematic payoff all kind of in the shortest period of time. It's truly exceptional.
Right. So the plan doesn't really go that perfect, so our main character does decide to kamikaze into Godzilla's mouth, but we have a little flashback to where, and this worked really well for me, in that it's not a flashback to reveal what our guy did, because it sets it up in such a way where the tech who is modifying his plane says, oh, and there's one more thing, and then the scene cuts. So you're like, oh, well, obviously he's putting in an ejection seat.
As soon as we saw that, we leaned over each other. We were like, ejection seat. And plus, I mean, we're observant guys. We're always looking for payoffs and we'll lean over to each other sometimes during movies and be like, that's some foreshadowing.
Well, and plus, they make it a point to mention earlier that there's never ejector seats.
They talk about the that all the pilots in kamikaze pilots didn't even have ejector seats. So it's like they added one in for this one, and so you cut to the flashback which this is the same tech that was with him on the island that caught him being a failed kamikaze pilot, and then completely hated him for failing to help save his men. And so, like, if there's anyone that wants this guy to die more than anyone else, it should be this tech guy.
But you have one of the more like kind of, I don't want to use the word beautiful per se, but
it's a touching moment.
But a very touching moment where the tech is like, he hears the main character's words about actually wanting to live now for Kiko, I believe is
Akiko,
Akiko,
his daughter,
is the daughter
his
character,
adopted daughter, yeah,
and actually wanting to live now, but knowing that he still has to do his duty. So then it flashes back to right after he flies the plane into Godzilla's mouth, and then it sees that, he does this. Here's the ejection seat, but then it goes into the better moment where he's like, "You need to live."
Yeah, he leans into him and he says, "Live." It is the kind of moment it's a touching moment. It's one man that sort of has all the reasons in the world to want this guy to die and convince this guy to do this kamikaze attack. And he's like, look, there's an ejector seat. You need to live for the future. If there's a line in the film or a line about the film that sort of sums up what it's about, like, live for the future, live for the next generation, rebuild, be a survivor.
It's almost like, look, we don't need to die for our country anymore. We need to live for our country.
A line from a certain video game that I love is, "This war has enough dead heroes." Simple as that.
Yeah. So the mission is a success. Godzilla's taken out. It's very cool. Everybody does this salute to, and at first it looked like the salute was to Godzilla, but I believe it was actually to the main character.
Yeah, I think they were saluting the pilot, but like also maybe like, look, Godzilla is just a creature and they killed it, so maybe just saluting the battle, the honor, the fallen creature, so to speak.
So everybody gets home. It's all amazing. It's happy. And then the neighbor, the female who kind of plays like the aunt character or aunt character, if you will, she comes
running up with little Akiko
with a telegram.
Yep, a telegram.
And come to find out that the mother character, Noriko, survived. Yeah, she survived the Godzilla attack.
You get the beautiful moment where he's running into the next town over, and he's climbing the stairs, and he goes into the hospital room, and she's all bandaged up and banged up, but she's alive. And so you have the family united there, finally properly becoming a family.
And it's incredibly emotional. Like it's
without a doubt sappy, but like sappy hits when it's done right, and it's done totally right.
Yeah, you could call it emotionally manipulative if you want, but it works because
it lands.
Everybody in the theater, including my wife,
choked back to tears.
Yeah, and the guy next to her was sobbing.
Yeah,
even our second time, I was tearing up. It's a good moment for sure. So, and then we're hit with, I think, a classic Godzilla trope, but this one's a little different here. The camera shows the side of Noriko's neck, and there seems to be some kind of, I will say, infection.
It appears
rising
to look
up
like
her
some
neck.
kind of infection traveling her neck, so to sort of imply that she's been somehow received some kind of poison from Godzilla, some kind of radiation sickness or infection from what happened. And it doesn't look like it's like a creature in there or anything weird like that, but like it's
ambiguous.
Something, and it doesn't really say fatal or not, but it did look like it was traveling kind of fast or spreading kind of fast. So it's like, who knows?
And then it immediately cuts to
a chunk of Godzilla
sinking in the ocean, and then it starts to regenerate. Then your classic theme kicks
Godzilla
in,
theme, which is your vintage sequel hook. When Godzilla dies in one of these movies, he's not allowed to really be dead. I think that's also one of those Toho stipulations.
It's in the contract.
Only they let Godzilla, like they decide if Godzilla ever dies, and like anytime they let anyone make a movie, they're like, you can't kill Godzilla. And I think the closest they let you do is like, you can kill him, but then like you got to show he's coming back at the end. So
and another one, he's got to have 3 rows of dorsal plates. He can't eat anybody.
Yeah, is there? Do they have
killed.
the rows on the toe count now? Is it 3 toes or 4 toes or something like that? There's some strange ones, but like they got to protect the character. They're very specific about protecting the image of Godzilla.
So after watching this the second time, I'm really confident in saying, and I'm not going to include the MonsterVerse here for a second because that's its own thing. Yeah. Sure, you could say, "Oh, that's a Godzilla movie,"
and
Jesse, aren't you going to include
it's a different
that?
style.
I gotta say, this is top 3, probably top 2, and I'm not going to be one of those guys who says, "Oh, well, it's never going to be better than the original."
Here's the thing:
I don't rewatch the original.
The more I think about it, I think I would carefully say, like, look, I've been one of those people that have put the original at the top for a long time. Not necessarily my most rewatched Godzilla movie, but like every time I watch it, I'm like, oh yeah, like. I kind of have the thing where it's like, well, those are all Godzilla movies, but like this is a real film. Like, and I don't try to be pretentious like that, but it's like that original Godzilla, like it has some genuine meat on the bones and it has a lot going on. It didn't have any, it wasn't coming in with any of the franchise baggage or anything like that. It was just a film. For all they knew, they would make one movie and they were never going to make anything again. It was going to fail miserably, but they were doing something with that. This is one that is like, look, I would never even put Shin Godzilla above the original. I would always put it up there with it or just below it. But like this one, like, again, recency bias, whatever. But it's like, I think over time, I will begin to say that this one is above the original for me because it hits in the same kind of emotional this is a real film kind of way.
It is more rewatchable.
And it has the advantage of being a movie in 2023, so it has all the natural advantages over a movie from 54, and it hits in the same kind of power and emotion and themes as the original does.
Yeah, I agree. Right now, it is for sure like the top two. It probably will be better for me.
And I love Shin, but like
it's better than Shin.
I think it's a stronger film than
it's
Shin.
very different too. It's kind of apples and oranges.
There's a lot of stuff that Shin does really, really well that it's like, the people that are like, Shin's not a real Godzilla movie, I'm like, dude, that is so good. It's so much a Godzilla movie, it's not even funny. It checks all the boxes, so to speak, or most of them. But it's like, this is just, and again, maybe I'm a sucker for more emotional storytelling. Maybe I'm a sucker for sort of human heroism and sacrifice and like sinking characters low and bringing them high and getting the happy ending. It seemed like for a long stretch of time the bittersweet ending was almost the best you could get in a lot of movies. Like, oh, if the hero dies, or if he lives but he's lost his loved one, or if he lives but he's lost his kid, or like he lives but his best friends die. Something like, it always feels like you're not really ever allowed to get like the proper like earned happy ending. It seemed like anytime a movie would build up that there was going to be some kind of big, costly, heroic sacrifice, something would happen, and it would play out that way, and there would be a cost. It's like, it's nice to see a movie that puts characters through the challenge, and you think like, oh my god, like they've been through so much, it might not all work out. I really want it to work out, and then it does work out, and it doesn't have to come at the cost of self-sacrifice. It's a genuine happy ending.
So we talked about after we saw it that this movie, if we had to take other movies and combine them to give you
what are the ingredients,
the feel and the tone and the story.
I think we came down to 3 Godzilla movies and 3 non-Godzilla movies, I think.
Yeah, so I think Godzilla
54.
54.
Yep.
Then you have Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, GMK.
Yep.
Then what was the other one as far as the Godzilla movies?
G14.
Godzilla 2014.
Yeah. Those are the 3 sort of aesthetic inspirations for it on the Godzilla front.
And then Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah, Top Gun Maverick, Jaws, and Dunkirk. Yeah, and it's weird. Like, you think, like, what? Like, Godzilla 54, GMK, Godzilla 2014, and then Dunkirk, Jaws, and Top Gun Maverick. But it's like, when you see the movie,
aesthetically, especially Dunkirk.
Yes, in terms of like, even the cinematography was very like, every time they're on the ocean, I'm like, it just feels very Dunkirkish.
And the music,
yeah, like it's not purely like, oh, they're in the water, it's Dunkirk or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's like, it feels like that.
Yeah. Well.
And the third act is some Top Gun Maverick stuff. It's that sort of human overcoming crazy odds, and
you think they're going to die, but they all live.
Yeah, and it's inspiring. I don't like to call movies inspiring, but it's inspiring kind of storytelling, and it's like, it's totally got that.
Well, and the doctor character says, none of us are allowed to die, or something to that effect, before they go on the mission.
Yeah, he talks about like nobody dies. This is a war being waged to save life for the future, or something to that effect.
Yeah, and nobody dies in the final act against Godzilla, which is super.
It's very encouraging.
It's cool.
It's like one of those things where it's like, stuff is cyclical, and I think the sort of textbook Hollywood ending, as they say, was so out of style for a long time, and the end thing was like, well, someone's got to die, something's got to be not happy, someone's got to sacrifice. Then the audiences kind of got beat up by like downer endings of various degree and bittersweet endings of various degree, that it's like now like a sort of movie that if it earns the happy ending, it just is that much more cathartic for audiences. Like, you just feel like, you see the response that Top Gun Maverick had at the box office, and it's like clearly that's giving audiences something there's a yearning for. And it's like, yeah, people want an earned happy ending, where things can work out, but it doesn't feel cheap.
Right, and it is very much like that. I have to say, as a diehard Godzilla fan, and for other Godzilla fans, it's a 10 out of 10 experience.
Yeah,
it might even be a 10 out of 10 film.
Yeah, and a film buff. I follow Jeremy Johns, is one of my guys on YouTube that I follow a lot. Shout out to Jeremy Johns, he's awesome. But like he did his review, and he's like I'm like very much like not a super Godzilla guy. Like, he's like, I've watched like a lot of the new stuff and whatnot. He's like, but like this was like sung its praises, and I was very happy to see that. I tend to agree with him more often than not.
Yeah, this is one of those Godzilla movies where I think this is a good entry point for people who are not fans of the franchise. Like, when you say, oh, let's watch this Godzilla movie, and they cringe a little bit. No. Yeah. Take a chance on this one. Let this be your entry point. If not the Monsterverse, let it be this one.
Yeah, here's the thing. Like, I would be hesitant to show my dad something like Shin Godzilla because I think it would be a little weird for him to get
very
into.
talky, political.
But I would show my dad this movie,
This.
and I feel like my dad would come away really.
Well,
digging
again,
it.
you know, my wife went with us this time, and
Yep.
you know, she's not super into Godzilla, and this is also a Japanese film, so it's subtitled.
Yep.
So, and it's not a lot of subtitles. It's not hard reading by any means.
Yeah.
Not compared to Shin Godzilla.
Shin Godzilla is
which
one of the wordiest Godzilla movies there is. Fast talking exposition.
And she was in tears at the end, you know, and she was very moved, and she liked it a lot. So
Yeah.
overall, it's a 10 out of 10 for me. I'm not even gonna. We've seen it twice
Yeah.
now.
Yep.
10 out of 10.
Yeah, it's a 10 out of 10. Yep, it checks the boxes. It checks all my boxes. It's what I wanted, what I needed. You know, it's like what big complaints or improvements do I have to lobby at this movie? It's like I don't really have
There's
any.
not
You know, it's
really
like
any.
this thing is what it is, and what it is awesome,
for
and
it-
it's
for
great
its-
at being what it is.
And for its budget, I said this in the spoiler-free
Yeah.
-1 episode. Shame on Hollywood, and I'm
Yeah.
going to keep saying that.
Exactly.
And I know 15 million is a lot for a Japanese production.
Yes.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
But when you see what they can do with their water simulation VFX and everything else in this
Yeah.
movie, and the weight behind everything, and
It's-
the
It speaks to the excesses of how Hollywood operates.
Yeah.
An executive, a co-executive, a supervisor, an area director, a this, a that, the other. These insanely sized, you know, over the top pricings for everything. Like clearly there's an issue with the Hollywood system that, like, if everything has to be a $200 million budget to be a blockbuster, clearly there's systemic problems. Because like we're getting amazing visuals like this. Like, hey, maybe the visual effects artists need to be prioritized more in terms of their wants, their needs, their money, and maybe the scheduling needs to be proper, and you need to actually prepare movies and have proper pre-production. Because here's the thing, they made this movie over the course of a long period of time. This thing wasn't rushed out. This thing was done filming I think a year and a half ago or something like that. Like they probably did a very clear, strict preparation, very tight script, shot what they shot, got the edit locked in, and said, these are the visual effects we need, and now we're going to work on this for a year or two, and fine-tuned it. It's like, that's a normal production cycle, not this like overspending an extra $50 million in overtime to scramble and redo 500 shots at the last second kind of nonsense.
The day before release or week before release.
Yeah, exactly.
Editing VFX.
Yeah, it's like this.
It's not sustainable.
This chaotic thing that they're doing. They're just, you know, someone said once, they're like, every time you see something CGI on the screen, it's just money flying through a printer. They're like, and you do 50 versions of a shot that it's like you know, you don't want to say it's a throwaway shot, but it's like you got 50, 60, 70 iterations of a shot that's just an establishing shot of a base or something. It's like, why, like, Hollywood, what are you doing? What are you doing? Final these shots. There's, you know, you don't need to put these things through this meat grinder over and over and over again and just waste money because you've got it, you know?
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. So I think that's probably going to wrap it up for this episode. It's kind of a beefy episode where we're sitting here right here at 2 hours, including our -1 review, our spoiler review here.
It'll be broken up into smaller bites for everyone to pick on the topics they prefer.
Yeah, and I'm going to try to put in the time
Time
stamps here and there, so you can kind of pick what you want and what you don't want. But this is our episode 0, our ground zero episode, so to speak.
Yeah,
so
kind of get an overall flavor of our style, of our tastes and wants, needs, and desires as far as cinema goes and how we view it.
So moving forward, I think from now on, things will be definitely more structured as far as like, okay, let's talk about our top 10 lists of this. Let's talk about this, news, that, whatever.
Yeah.
But again,
all kinds of fun ranking discussions, because that's where you can get into some fun nitty gritties of talking about a lot of movies. Of, you know, I like to go in terms of like franchises are fun to rank, but also like director by director, like how do you rate his filmography? How do you rate that filmography?
Yeah.
You know, those are always fun discussions.
We'll do that. So again, we're trying to drop episodes every Monday now. Follow us at the Film Jump on X, formerly known as Twitter. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate you. We are the Film Jump. And again, my name was Jesse.
Yep. I'm Chris. Happy to have you guys.
Yep. And we'll talk to you soon.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are tonight's entertainment.
You are not in Kansas anymore. You are on Pandora.
No, I'm simply saying that life finds a way.